Tower of Babel. You have, is it too high? Yeah, can you, I do have echo. We're getting too much. Turn me down. There. Is that a little bit better? Feels a little better here too. Okay. So, the world was destroyed. Out comes Noah and his family. They're a superior race from the other side. They're the only ones that have stepped on both sides of the flood. And their progeny are brilliant people. But the human race is deteriorating quickly because of all the environmental changes I talked to you about. God destroyed them because they had a one-world empire. And they had turned their back on God. They weren't listening to Him anymore. And they had crossed the line as far as their own research and their own R&D. And we're going to look at some of that. Now, God looked down and He said, they're nothing but wicked again. Prior to the flood, it said their thoughts were wicked day in and day out. Their thoughts were wicked. When they slept, their thoughts were wicked. Everything was wicked. And God looks down and says, same thing's happening. Here we are, instead of spreading out like I commanded you to replenish the earth and go out about the earth, you're all kind of hanging out in one place and you're redeveloping this new one world order, this new world empire. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to see us going through this again. So what does He do? He confounds their language. He confounds their language into approximately 20 languages. How do we know that? Because the linguists can take us back to all the root languages. And they can come to about 20, maybe 21 or 22 maybe, but for sure 20. 20 root languages. English has part of its root language is German. And you can see that if you speak German. Ours is different than French. Different root languages, but everything filters down. There are over 600 languages today, but yet it filters down to 20 languages. Where did those 20 languages come from? Now, the evolutionists told us that initially, before the linguists did their job, way back, the evolutionists said it all came from one language. You know, the apes started making noise, and they started clamming and banging heads and banging things, and, you know, and they started communication, okay? So they started, and then a little bit of phonation here and there, and natural selection, select for the one who could phonate the best, and, you know, and then kind of language developed. That's what is prescribed by the evolutionists. The creationist says, no, that is the way it worked. We were given one language, but then multiple languages were developed at the Tower of Babel. Now, modern linguists have come back and shown that without any biblical assistance, they found that there are about 20 languages, period. And everything else is grown out of that. Does that make sense that it would be 20 languages? Yeah, 20, 15, something. God divided it all up. Now, here's the problem. The evolutionist said that over millions of years now, over long periods of time, when man first came out of the tree, so for about over a 4 million year period, that speech developed and language developed. Now, he has to explain how speech and phonation developed in 20 different places all at the same time. That can't be explained. How is it? It was hard enough as an evolutionist to envision this speech developing when we see nothing of the sort happening in any other animals anywhere else. It's a structural change, actually, in the larynx. It's a whole structural change. So how does this happen? But now, as an evolutionist, you have to believe that speech developed in 20 different places. And the phonation and the language was 20 separate languages, and they all developed at the same time. Now, there's that, or there's the simple explanation that God came down and confounded their language. and he split them into 20 different languages, and they were no longer able not just to build this Tower of Babel, Tower of Confusion. It was also the fact that they had a world empire they had to leave. They had to desert this whole thing. And now they're left with all of them dividing up, and now you have a separation of races, separations of colors, separation of all kinds of talents. All of the science and information that was on the other side of the flood that came over to this side of the flood, the post-Diluvian world, at that point in time split. Okay? That's an important concept to keep in mind when I start to show you some other things. It's not doing this little thing, Georgia. And you've run out of sorries. Is Georgia up there? She knew she was out of sorry. She's not even up there. Okay, something changed. Is that the right one? Yes, it is. The Ice Age. I'm going to talk to you about the Ice Age. Facts. It covered large sections, North America, Europe, Asia. It never covered more than a third of the Earth's surface. Glaciers in the upper latitudes, rainfall, lots of it in the lower latitudes. Next. The Ice Age at its peak lowered the oceans by 600 feet, allowing the appearance of land bridges. People wonder, well, how did all the people get spread all over the globe? How did all the animals get spread all over the globe? How did this all happen when you had everything as it is now? Well, it wasn't. During the Ice Age, you had all this water accumulate on the northern and the southern poles. And that lowered our level of our oceans by up to 600 feet, and land bridges now appeared, and people were able to, I suppose we can go to that one next. People were able to move across, animals would move across. Once the Ice Age disappeared, once the glaciers started to melt, then you ended up with ocean comes back up, and whole races, whole people, whole areas, animals and everything isolated. And then you have different changes in species, and you have different kinds of occurrences. Now colors change, everything changes. And it makes sense because you now isolated populations. If you want to write something down, this is what you write down. Formula for an Ice Age. There are 5 facts that will give you an Ice Age. The evolutionist has over 60 different theories of an Ice Age. And there are more coming all the time. More theories, more theories. Because no one theory explains everything. It doesn't even come close to explaining half of it. They can't explain it. They have Ice Ages coming and going, coming and going. They believe that we have only been out of our Ice Age for a few thousand years, 4,000 or 5,000 years. But they believe that the poles were like this and covered for millions of years in the past. That's what they believe. Now I'm going to show you something that'll knock your socks off in just a little bit here about that fact. Very cold, well, who did that? We'll go back here. Okay, very cool summers, heavy snowfall, warm winters, warm oceans, cold land surface. Now this is easy to remember because I'm gonna tell you how it works, and it's going to be very easy to remember. The waters are hot, 86 degrees. Okay, they're like Hawaii. Okay, bathtub water. How the water get that hot? Well, the friction and the movement of the plates, the volcanoes going off underneath the water, and the hot water, the jets of water coming up from the waters of the deep. All of this contributed to enough energy to have an even distribution of water throughout the globe, and now 70% of the globe is inundated with water, and it's all warm water. There were no glaciers. There was no cold water at the North and South Pole. It was all warm at the beginning. Okay? Now what happens? Here's the Earth, and now you have no canopy. You don't have an even distribution of energy. So the next consequence is that the poles start getting colder, and it's warmer right at the equator, right? So you have these huge oceans. The oceans themselves now are warm. What happens over a warm ocean? Cloud cover. Cloud cover in both the northern latitudes and right at the equator, and in the southern latitude. So you have all this cloud cover. Clouds come up, they blow over the land surface like they do today. But the difference is that this is a warm ocean throughout the entire world. So as this water is coming, let me move that, you would develop what was called hypercanes. This has been fed into the computer, and this is what has come out. This is not just a little tiny computer query. Big, with lots of factors being played into this. If you have these oceans this warm, and you have huge convections that occur with the clouds. Now we have tornadoes, we have hurricanes. Hurricanes now, these are called hypercanes. They're bigger than a hurricane. Right now, today, you can have a volcano go off underneath the water in the ocean, and it can make the water above boil. Okay? It can boil the water above. Now picture, all along that 43,000 mile zipper, did you know that is not a mountain range? All along that ridge, the mid-Atlantic and all the rest of these, all that ridge, it's not mountain range. That's volcanic lava that is coming up and spreading itself out layer after layer after layer as the globe actually moved apart and all the plates split and sent everything out. That's what that is. And coming out from there are spurts of volcanoes, huge volcanoes, that used to, again, remember, be on the surface and then got buried, but they still blow up their volcanic material, heating up the oceans. So they could heat an ocean that was already 86 degrees to boiling. Not the whole ocean, just an area. You know, 4 or 5 square miles of area could be heated up to boiling like it happens today. But under the circumstances that we have here, you could form hypercanes. These are hurricanes that have a horizontal wind speed of 600 miles an hour. A vertical wind speed of 100 miles an hour. Can you picture the wind coming down at 100 miles an hour and hitting you at 600 miles an hour? These would occur, and they occurred more up into your higher latitudes, and they would dump. They would dump, if depending on where they dumped themselves, they would dump water around the equator, or they would dump snow in the northern and southern latitudes. Now, there's Antarctica down there, so it starts to have ice, and more ice, and more ice, and it gets crushed down, and you start forming glaciers. Up top, you start forming more and more ice, until you get an ice pole, and it grows. And as more of these come over, they dump it, more of them occur. A gentleman by the name of Anthony Cook, he was a cold regions Army geologist, took 7,100 feet of core samples in 9 different areas of Antarctica. And of these 9 different glacial areas in Antarctica, he found over 2,000 volcanic explosions, volcanic eruptions. He found glacier ice, volcano, glacial ice, volcano, volcano, volcano. Over 2,000. These volcanoes were still going off. The earth was still, all of this that had occurred was slowing down, but it had not reached an equilibrium yet. And now you've got all of this snowfall. If you have 4/5 of an inch a day of snowfall, within less than 300 years, you're going to have a glacier that's 6,336 feet. That's a big glacier. That's what we're seeing now. It doesn't take forever to form these glaciers. And the model that is used by the creationists shows that the glacial period occurred over about 500 years. It slowly built up, it slowly crept down. No more than 1/3 of the globe was involved in glaciers, but it reached its peak at 500 years. Now, why did it reach a peak, and what made it recede back to what we see today? And the answer is very simple. The oceans. They cooled down. Over a period of time, the ocean water cooled down, and so you had less and less being dumped in places, less and less water till it reached its equilibrium. And so you see the Fertile Crescent, and you see all the areas that used to be, that are currently desert, back in Abraham's day, before it was fertile, it was beautiful.